So today's topic is gender equality and equity. I'm sure you're all aware and signing up. And my name is Hyacinth Walters-Olsen. I am the founder of Yod Consult. I'm also a mentor for PWN, the Norwegian chapter, one of their Global 100 mentors. And I'm a DEIB consultant that works in collaboration with Diversify and Her Space. So just a few house rules today, just go over a little bit of technicalities and formalities. Please put if you go to the little grid, you see that, I mean, we've all been on a million Zoom meetings, so you will most probably know about speaker view or grid view. But if you go to speaker view, then it just helps to focus, less distractions. You can zero in on the speaker, catch everything they're saying. And we'd highly recommend that. It also just helps you this is a 2-hour session, so it just helps you to kind of retain your focus during that two-hour period. What we're going to try to do today is we're going to have 80 or so minutes of discourse from our panelists, and then the last 30 minutes, before we go to the last 30 minutes, we'll have a 5-minute break, just so you know, we'll ask you to participate throughout. This is not a performance, it's a conversation. We like people to get engaged, we like people to comment, we like people to yeah, Jacob's already starting. We like people to comment, we like people to ask questions, and so fire them at us. Can I just ask you though, that when you do ask a question or when you do comment, that you just preface it with comment, colon, and your comment, or question, colon, your question. It just helps me as the moderator to be able to sift through and see what's a comment and what's a question. Also, we are recording this today and we're live streaming it. So we're recording the Zoom and we're also live streaming on Facebook through the Diversify website. So this recording will be available to you at a later date. Before we proceed, any questions about anything so far from anybody? No? Everyone who's got your cameras on, ready to proceed? Thumbs up. Yay. Perfect. Right, so let's dive in today. Again, stating the obvious, you know, with diversity type conversations, sometimes strong emotions can arise, but we will ask for kindness and respect. There's no tolerance whatsoever of any bullying or heckling, but you're all fabulous people, and we just know that you are all excellent and don't do any of that, but we just have to say it for the sake of it, for formality's sake. So before we proceed any further, I will not introduce the speakers. I'll ask them to introduce themselves because they're the best people to do it. And we will start with the beautiful Astrid Sundberg. How are you today, Astrid? And can you introduce yourself to us today?
I'm very well, thank you, Hyacinth. Thank you for the pleasure of being a panelist here today. My name is Astrid Sundberg, or Astrid Sundberg. I'm a Scandi Brit. I've been working in Oslo for 9 years, but I'm actually from the UK. My background is a bachelor's in business and law from the University of Birmingham, a postgraduate in leadership coaching with over 20 years experience in leadership roles. My specialism is the area of people and talent, as well as global recruitment programs within the STEM sector. So areas such as employee experience, organizational culture, diversity, equity, and inclusion have been very central themes to my work, and they're topics that I'm very passionate about. I am currently the Chief HR Officer for Shortcut, who are a tech company headquartered in Oslo. We're the biggest producer of mobile apps in the Nordics. And I'm also a workshop facilitator of a Google initiative called #IamRemarkable. This is voluntary work that I do in my spare time to support women and underrepresented groups in the workplace and beyond. I'm really excited to be here today. Thanks, Hyacinth, and very, very curious and excited to be with Jacob and of course Chiso today too.
Lovely, thank you so much, Astrid, and we're happy to have you back. You're a returning speaker. And, you know, we're so excited to hear from you today. Always lots of wisdom to be shared and great insights from Astrid. Jacob, we're going to fly all the way to Melbourne and we're coming to you. So here we are, we've landed, we're in Melbourne. The floor is yours, Jacob.
I mean, you're so welcome. Look, it's just, we just keep giving here in Australia. Look, open borders on Zoom. It's what it's all about. There we go, done. So my name is Jacob. My pronouns are they and them. So I'm a non-binary person based here in Melbourne. Before continuing, I do just want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri and the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations on the lands known as Victoria. These lands were never ceded and were impacted by colonisation and an ongoing genocide of the first peoples of this land, which we call Australia. I would like to pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to recognise that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So my background is I'm an academic, I'm a researcher, a human rights worker, a very bored makeup artist 10 minutes before this event started, so you're welcome. I am a drag queen in my spare time. And I'm doing my PhD in medicine, looking at the experiences of LGBTQI+ youth, which stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, queer, asexual, aromantic, and anyone who doesn't fit into a cisgender and or heterosexual mold of life and experience, and looking at how their well-being can be shaped by them, for them, from a global perspective. Which is a world first in the research field, which I'm incredibly excited and very privileged to have that opportunity to be able to do so. Thank you very much. Appreciate the applause. All together now. No, but I also stop it. Please keep going. I love validation, please. Also, my background is in a practical sense, because that all sounds fine with accolades, but so I am a Queen's Young Leader. I was awarded an award from Her Majesty the Queen in 2016 for my work in suicide prevention before moving into international development. I'm the outgoing coordinator of the Commonwealth Youth Gender and Equality Network, currently led by a phenomenal Nigerian woman, Olalawa Abugan, which represents the 1.2 billion young people across the 54 member states of the Commonwealth. So I have a long history in advocacy, development work, in telling the right people to go away and creating space for young people, and not just diverse, but necessary voices in often deeply underrepresented spaces. In short, I'm the person who talks a lot of shit and gets a lot of people angry for all the right reasons. So there we go. Pew, pew, finger guns.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jacob. Throw it all at us today. We're loving it. So
Can't wait.
Chisholm, so you're all getting a flavor from just 2 introductions today, how phenomenal this conversation is going to be. Now we're coming over to you, Chisholm, landing back in Oslo.
Hi, everyone. It's really hard to follow Jacob, but I'm going to try. My name is Chiso Modeze. I am Nigerian. I am an economist by training and profession. I am also an entrepreneur. I'm the founder of Diversify, Herspace, Metal, and a bunch of other projects I work on. So let's just say I have an itch to create things. I am a DEIB, so Diversity, Inclusion, Equity, and Belonging Specialist. I am also an enthusiast. So you can catch me any day of the week having conversations about everything that is so wrong and how it needs to be better and how I can contribute to making it better. So I'm really happy to be here. I am passionate about creating space for people, for everyone, and also just learning, about the things that we don't know about, trying to deconstruct societal constructs and a lot of the status quo we accept passively because it's been imprinted and fed to us our entire lives. So I'm really happy to be here to deconstruct some of this and to learn from Astrid, Jacob, Hyacinth, and also the rest of you here. So looking forward to this conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Chisholm. As Chisholm just said, we really want you guys to engage with us, make sure you comment, send us questions. This is as much a conversation with you as it is us talking to you. So we're going to dive straight into this today. I'm so excited. Anybody that has joined us recently, let us know where you're joining from. We've got people from London, from the Maldives, from South Africa, from Oslo. Let us know where you're joining from. We like to know where people are joining us from. It helps us to engage with you better. Sweden, perfect. Right, wonderful. So for the speakers, what I'm going to ask of you today, I know that you're all very passionate about the topic of diversity and inclusion. But in order to really engage with the audience and have everybody, be able to have a Q&A session with you guys, fantastic panelists, I'm going to ask you to keep your answers to a minimum, or to a maximum, should I say, of 3 minutes. Now, I know that'd be a challenge, but I'm going to ask you to do that. Okay, so I'm going to throw out the first question. I've got a list of questions that I've prepared in advance. I'm going to throw out the first question. It's to all three of you. I'm just going to throw it out, and the first person who would like to answer, please go ahead. What does gender equality and equity in the workplace mean to each of you? Jump in.
Is it okay if I start? Chiso?
Go ahead.
I think it's important to answer this question looking at the terminology between equality and equity, Hyacinth, because I speak to a lot of people who get confused over the difference between equality and equity, and I know it's something that we've covered in previous sections, but in previous sessions rather. So I'm just going to say this, that where equality versus equity comes into play, it's really about understanding the different emphasis between these two words. And in simplest terms, both feed into an idea of fairness, but the difference is that equality is about treating everyone fairly, regardless of their need or regardless of any disadvantages they might face. Whereas equity assumes that not everyone is on a level playing field in the first place. And the best example I've ever heard to nuance this is, imagine if you had to distribute food to a group of families where socioeconomic status, living conditions, and number of children differed. So if you want to distribute that food based on equality, you simply give the same amount of food to everyone. However, equity would take into account what way it might be fairest to distribute the food, perhaps taking into account which families should get more. So equity is an attempt at trying to be fair and looking at people differently depending on individual needs and individual circumstances.
Thank you, Astrid. Who would like to jump in next? Chisholm, Jacob?
Yeah, I can add to that. And it's more or less the same thing, but I guess I could say it's in a different way. When I think about gender equality, I think it basically looks at when people of all genders have equal rights, responsibilities, and opportunities. So gender equality concerns, everyone, men, women, transgender, diverse people, children, families, and it impacts people of all ages and of all backgrounds. Now, just to explain the benefits of gender equality is that it prevents violence against women and girls, for example. It is essential for economic, prosperity. Societies that value women, men, and gender diverse people are equals and safer. As equals, as safer. And gender equality also ensures that we live in a safe society. And if you've been paying attention to the news lately, you know that is something that is very important. So basically, when I think of gender equality, I just think of it as equal outcomes for men, women, and gender diverse people. Whereas when I think about gender equity, it recognizes that women and gender diverse people are not in the same starting position as men, for example. And this is due to historical and social disadvantage social disadvantages. So treating women, gender diverse people, or even men equally might actually not be fair, because it can create more constraints and disadvantages. So gender equity measures are imperative to level the playing field. So basically, I like to think of gender equity as the process to achieving gender equality.
Okay, thank you, Chisholm. And the same question to you, Jacob. What does gender equality and equity in the workplace mean to you?
It's an excellent question. Just FYI, I do apologize. I live in Australia and our internet is very shaky. So I am getting ever so slightly delayed, but I'll make it work for us. So there we go. Look, I think gender equity, to me, equity is about provision. So it's about what do you actually provide to people in a practical sense to ensure that they can achieve a status of equality. I think equality is very much about goals, and you know, it is an opportune idealism for us to be able to get to. But I think there's, if I can sort of queer this a little bit, I think we do track into dangerous territory when we talk about gender equality, not including or, you know, blanketing the experiences of men purely from the point of trans, for example. So, you know, for trans men and trans masculine people, they have their own experiences of achieving gender equity processes and gender equality in workplaces as well. So, you know, these interesting perspectives that we have to take into account through which we view the lens of gender in workplaces, through our processes, through our givings and so forth to achieve those goals. I think where we get convenient, shall we say? I almost said lazy. Lazy is not the word, but convenient is assuming that policies will be the be all and end all, and that will fix things. That will be the equity provider or the medium through which equity is, you know, absolutely given without problems. But that's not necessarily the case. We're dealing with, if anyone's paid attention to Australian news, we are absolutely experiencing that horrifically in our federal parliament at the moment in Australia. And to why the reasons why that is, there's a myriad of reasons, but one of the big reasons that's come up with that is referenced in regard to freedoms that patriarchal levels of maleness, you know, have, and which is, I think, dangerous because we're just trying to see that as a point of power relation rather than accessibility and opportunity and freedom. So complex, but that's my general perspective on it.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much. Now, you know, that was a simple question that I asked, a basic foundational question, because, you know, just want you all to understand the panelist understanding, and from this that will form the framework of how they will answer the questions today. Now, if any answers come up to questions that are asked and you've got a different opinion, then yes, please go ahead and let us know in the comments section as well. So Chisholm, I'd just like to ask you, in your opinion, what's the difference between gender equality, equity, and women's empowerment?
We have this defined gender equality and equity. So in differentiating that from women's empowerment, I think that oftentimes when we talk about gender equality or gender equity, most of us just think men and women issues and women empowerment. But I guess what I want to say here is that women empowerment is an imperative part of achieving gender equality, because it mandates, you know, championing and increasing women's self-worth, you know, her access to opportunities and resources, have visibility within social structures, her power and control over her own life, both inside her home and outside her home, and also her decision-making power. But it is not the same as, so it's not the all-consuming gender equality and gender equity in the workplace. Because when we look at gender equality only from the lens of cis male and cis women, we leave a bunch of people out of that equation. So basically saying that women empowerment is imperative and a part of gender equality, but it is not comprehensively synonymous to gender equality.
Okay, thank you for that, Chisholm. Now, Astrid, I'd like to come to you with this next question. Now, you and I, we've had a few conversations, and I'll just ask you to share, if you don't mind, with everyone, some of your lived experience of gender inequality in the workplace, and why have you become an advocate for diversity and inclusion?
That's a really good question, Hyacinth, thank you. So I'm an advocate in this area because of my lived experience as a woman in leadership, which has been pretty turbulent at times. I have this theory, and it's that you need to first experience some form of inequality yourself in order to understand how sort of damaging and unfair it is for anyone who might experience it. And even though I'm coming to today's discussion as a white cisgender able-bodied woman from a middle-class family living in one of the happiest and most affluent countries in the world, the truth is I have experienced discrimination in the workplace on multiple occasions. And this is because I have predominantly been the only in the leadership room throughout my career. And by that, I mean, I've been the only person of my gender. And actually, since the start of my career, I've also observed a worrying lack of women in the workplace, especially on leadership teams and boards. So just to give some context, I started out my career as a graduate recruitment specialist working for the STEM sector in 1997 when I was about 24 years old. I'm 47 now. And I had the privilege of being fast-tracked into a leadership career at a startup company. And I have experienced some quite dark and difficult times in my career from toxic workplaces that felt very much as if they were set up for men to succeed and for women to fail. So, for example, I've had to bring up unequal pay. I've been questioned at interviews for roles about promotion, regarding my intention to make babies. I've had my competencies questioned because of being a mother. I could honestly write a book on meeting culture, and for anyone that thinks that microaggressions, mansplaining and manterrupting are made up, they're not. I also, carry the trauma of not just being violently sexually groped and harassed by a more senior colleague at work, but the awful repercussions of the intimidating behavior afterwards. And then you can just add in a ton of other stuff like sexually suggestive comments, unwelcome sexual contact, groping, teasing, all from supposed colleagues. And it might be easy, Hyacinth, to think that these things happened a long time ago when I was a younger woman. But the reality is that things haven't changed all that much. And some of the research coming from Pew, a non-partisan fact tank, are releasing still now extensive research to show that discrimination in the workplace is rife. In fact, they've highlighted in a recent study that 42% of the women in their study had experienced gender-based discrimination in the workplace. Let's just take that in. That's nearly half of all women in this. So that's what I've got to say in terms of my lived experience. And with odds like these, combined with my lived experience, I don't find it hard to be an advocate in this area. I'm also trying to learn very much about not just the white woman's perspective. And I consider it an important part of my work to be vulnerable and share my lived experiences, I guess you could say.
Sure, thank you so much. Tiffany, thank you for that question. We will share with everybody after this session any resources that have been mentioned or quoted by the panelists, just so that, we want to equip you as well. We know how it can be to listen to something and then all of the knowledge just goes out of your mind as soon as you walk away from the meeting. So we will send a follow-up, okay? So Chisholm, just coming back to you. You talked about, you know, a lot of gender conversations, especially when it comes to equality and equity, focusing on cis male, cis female. So in your opinion, why is having a narrow narrative very dangerous?
Thanks, Hyacinth. So I know that this might be controversial, but I genuinely believe that gender is a cultural and social construct. Absolute sex is a spectrum. You know, it's not binary in any way, form, or means that we've been led to believe. And doctors and hopefully the rest of the world are slowly coming to understand this. You know, we have a cultural understanding of what gender is and what it looks like. And you know, especially in the West, we have a very binary view of it. You know, when we view gender based on cis male and cis female framework, then we're leaving out, you know, many groups of people who do not identify as one or the other, people who also have a stake in society, people who should celebrate in gender equality and equity. So by viewing gender in the widely accepted binary form, in many ways, we erase or choose to be blind to the experiences and realities of those that do not ascribe to either the male or the female box. And I mean, so we have to look at how can we actually confront the conservatism towards gender fluidity. And like everything in the world, it really starts with education. And this education should not be considered, you know, extra work. This should be the absolute bare minimum to be a decent human being. You know, we should all strive to exist in a world where we do not willingly choose to ignore the existence or experiences of groups of people. So it is dangerous when we do so. So we all have the obligation to learn. I think that should be the minimum starting point for everyone.
Okay, thank you. Jacob, nice to see you back. I know that you've been having some technical difficulties. I'm going to come to you in just a moment, but before we move forward, just going back to Astrid, when you talked about your lived experience, could I just ask you what might constitute gender discrimination in the workplace?
Yeah, of course, this is a question I guess I would answer through the lens of HR and legalities. I mean, it can be direct or indirect on the basis of gender or gender identity, multiple or intersectional discrimination. Of course, sexual harassment would be included as well. Gender discrimination can relate to equal or unequal pay, unequal treatment at work on the basis of gender. It can incorporate discrimination on the grounds of pregnancy or anything that breaches parental leave protections, as well as discrimination on the basis of surrogacy, IVF, adoption, and sort of other forms of care leave. These are sort of EU laws. Instruction to discriminate can be an offence. So that's if, for example, I don't know, let's just say a recruitment agency were instructed to only recruit one gender for a role. I think the laws are adapting slowly for people within the LGBT plus community. So I'm sure Jacob can, you know, add a bit more light here. There are some quite archaic terms used around gender. And the one thing I will just add that may constitute gender discrimination, but the discussion about what you do and how you might deal with a case or a situation, now that's a whole different matter, of course.
Sure, thank you. So Jacob, would you like to add anything to that? Could you let us know if there's been any major changes in the laws that you're aware of in Australia around gender?
Yeah, sure. This is actually very good timing for a very gross point. So I'll come back and also comment just on Chisholm's previous point as well. But just in the case of, say, industrial relations laws and hiring allowance from a state government perspective, I say state as in the largest level, so federal here in Australia in our context. It actually came to light yesterday during a Senate's estimate, which is our upper house of our parliament, that our national industrial relations laws don't actually, as we had been told, don't actually protect transgender, intersex and queer people in Australia. So they will protect people at a national level on regards to same-sex relationships, with regards to sexuality and sexual orientation, but it does not cover gender identity or gender expression, for example, or sex characteristics, which is a really interesting thing to take into account when we see our state and territory governments and our state and territory laws, which, for example, Victoria, where Melbourne is the state capital. In Victorian legislation, we are completely protected. And it's written in a very nuanced manner because we also introduced a Bill of Rights. So not only do we have state legislation that borrows from federal legislation and fills in our gaps, but we also have a Bill of Rights that then strengthens those protections with broad-based statements from a legal perspective, which all companies have to legally adopt. They have to use those acts of parliament and those acts of law when they are putting policies together. If their policies are not in reference directly to those particular acts of law, then that company is in breach, unless they have a special exemption, which we also do allow in very unique circumstances where gender segregation is actually required for safety reasons, safeguarding, say faith-based reasons. You know, there are absolutely flexibilities and exemptions.
Wonderful, thank you. You said you wanted to touch on what Chiso was talking about.
I think it might actually, I can do it in my next question if you'd like to ask the question, Hyacinth. I will allow that because otherwise I'll be here forever.
Okay, no problem. Well, I was going to ask you, what is gender mainstreaming? It's a term that is, you know, thrown around out there, gender mainstreaming, and how can workplaces be more inclusive of gender diverse people?
Sure. So thanks for the question. It's a good one. You wrote it yourself and I can tell it's excellent. So I think with compliments, love compliments. I think so gender mainstreaming in a very basic manner, because yes, I'm an academic, but I will try. Have I mentioned I'm an academic? I'm an academic anyway, but in the most accessible of terms, gender mainstreaming came about historically through a development practice, so international development practice, community development practice, and then has found itself adopted into corporate and workplace and business spaces. So typically gender mainstreaming was known as women's mainstreaming, it was then known as female mainstreaming, and now it's called gender mainstreaming. They all basically mean the same thing, which is seeing women and female people, predominantly women, in spaces of access, opportunity and power at a similar level to men, and putting procedures and actions in place to ensure that that balance can actually be achieved. That might be through, you know, like I mentioned before, that might be through in policy work, that might be in counting and having quotas, that could be in really basic things like, you know, doing a women's specific intervention in a particular industry or space. So that's the basics of gender mainstreaming. But there are some issues with it. So I personally don't like it. Love gender, hate the mainstream. It's what it is. It's what it is. But I think this kind of builds into what Chisholm was very clearly articulating before, is that it's the danger of the single narrative. And I'm not the person who came up with that term, but to build on a contentious feminist at the moment, unfortunately, because she's quite trans exclusive, which is really disheartening to see. But it's not J.K. Rowling. But, you know, there is this point around you know, the gender mainstreaming and these singular narratives around gender aren't just harmful to gender diverse people like myself, but they're also really harmful to, you know, various men and various women as well. It homogenizes our experiences. It homogenizes our experiences, so, which means dilutes them, reduces us down to same. so, you know, it's the assumption that, you know, every person of a particular gender, sex, experience will experience the world in a particular circumstance in a very, very similar way, which is dangerous because we don't. No one here on this call or within, you know, the 7 billion people plus in the world, no one experiences the world and opportunities in the same way, right? This is why we have disparity. It's why we have discrimination. And a big critique that we see in development practice, as we do in workplace relations, is you can't just slap what tries to be a holistic approach onto a problem and assume that that will fix it. Mainstreaming deeply homogenizes and removes the messiness that is human experiences. And so what that then does is that it perpetuates these issues that we as gender diverse people face. And I'm saying this as a white, middle class, educated, well-to-do person who, you know, has no incarceration, has, you know, no physical disabilities. Like, I can navigate myself through these spaces with relative ease if I don't come out. Until I talk, and then people are just like, oh, it's a queer. Ooh. But then, or they're just like, yay, let's go to Mardi Gras. These. But, you know, I know what they're like. They're allies. But, you know, it's what it does is it perpetuates this idea of, you know, all trans people are the same, all gender diverse people are the same, or which is, I can deal with it. It's not great, but I can deal with it. Or it gets to the worst part of it, of people telling me to my face, you don't exist. We don't employ your kind. You know, well, there's no policies for you and you're the only one, so I guess we'll just deal, or you can just deal. That's a bit too hard, you know. So you start to you don't just get pushed to the side, you almost get eradicated. Which so just in the interest of time, but I think this is really important because there's a necessity of conversations around the micro pieces around gender discrimination that lead to the bigger pieces. As trans and gender diverse people, we are deeply invisibilized, and that's even more severe for trans women of color in particular, that it gets to the point where when we are told we don't exist, we experience one of the highest rates of murder in the entire world. And even those small little things that might seem like nothing in the workforce lead to very large, dangerous actions outside of those spaces. So we need to be deeply careful about how we homogenize people's experiences and just ensure that if you're there to work, then you just get to work and do the job. Go home, that's it.
Wow. Highest rates of murder?
One of, yeah.
And suicide? It's quite high.
Yeah, murder and suicide.
As well, right? Wow.
Yeah.
Just want to come to the participants, everybody here today. Thank you, Jacob. That was a very comprehensive answer, and thank you. Love your knowledge. Is everybody still with us? Is everybody still in the room? Let us know. Use your emoticons. Brilliant. Great. Thank you. Good to know that everybody's still with us. So, Astrid, coming back to you. Just want to ask you, how can companies advocate for greater gender equity? And how do you know if your workplace is toxic?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if I was addressing this question from a sort of leadership, workplace culture kind of perspective, I'm going to start off by quoting some of the great Michelle King, who released a book called The Fix, which I'm very hyped about at the moment. She's got an interesting theory around gender inequality and workplace culture, because according to King, gender inequality exists in workplaces because most organizations are set up to enable one type of worker to succeed. And that one type of worker tends to be a white, middle-class, able-bodied, heterosexual male. Now, King calls this male prototype the Don Draper. It's a reference from Mad Men. Describing them as dominant, autocratic, assertive, aggressive, competitive, even exclusionary in order to get ahead. And the more closely that employees align to the Don Draper prototype male, according to King, the more likely they are to succeed. And this prototype leadership culture is what's ingrained and insidious in many workplaces. So having a success prototype like this not only hinders women and minority groups within the workplace from advancing, actually hinders men too, because a lot of men do not subscribe to the Don Draper stereotype. And with that idea, King says that workplaces are sort of hardwired and support a prototype man, as do the systems, policies, structures, and cultures around it. So the Don Draper theory causes barriers for anyone who isn't a Don. Now, the thing I'd say about leadership and a culture that can advocate for better gender equality is that it has to come from the top. It really has to come from leaders, because, you know, these are the people who have the chance to set the standard for behaviours, and values communicated from the top down are really important, because they set the blueprint for the kind of values that employees are expected to mirror. So it really is leaders and decision makers that have a superpower here to build the culture and set the gold standard. However, many leadership teams lack women and underrepresented groups. So it may be that these gold standards are not always reflective of the right behaviours. And that can only be fixed in one way, and that's by conscious efforts to hire in more differences. So companies can monitor their company cultures to ensure that they eliminate bias and cultivate, you know, more sort of inclusive and thriving communities in which everyone can bring their whole selves to work. And a good place to start is to see where employees are thriving. Are there an equal number of women progressing up the ladder as there are men? Is the leadership team or board reflective of women in underrepresented groups? Even these basic aspects can tell you whether people are being included in the culture. And if you think that your workplace, wherever you work, could advocate for greater gender equality, then go straight to the people who set out the corporate values and start a conversation. You can remind your leaders that greater representation of women and underrepresented groups has been statistically proven to make companies more productive, more innovative, more profitable. And having a workplace culture that advocates for gender equity and equality is overridingly important. Now, coming on to the second part of your question, I don't know if I've still got time, Hyacinth, but I'm going to go for it anyway. I've only got a short answer to this. How would you know if a company culture is toxic or not? As an indicator, you can do a few simple things. You can look at the number of leavers from a company. That info is really easy to see on LinkedIn with a bit of social media detective work. So before you join a company, for instance, you could reach out to people who've left and find out if they'd be prepared to share their reasons with you. And then you can look on the reviews on Glassdoor or Equality Check, which is a very popular tool in Scandinavia based on anonymous employee reviews. It won't give you a red cross on whether the company culture is directly toxic or not, but it can give you an indication. Mm-hmm. So I think the last thing you could do is, if you're in a job interview process, ask your potential employer about their vision, goal, strategies, and see whether equality and inclusion measures have been sort of woven into those as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Astrid. All right, Chisholm, we are coming over to you now. And I'd like to ask you about something that we kind of had a bit of a brief conversation about recently. There was a post that was circulating around on social media. It was quite controversial, especially on LinkedIn. And it was talking about, there was a picture of a lady, and it was saying, this is what a founder or female, I'm a founder, I'm a female founder. And a lot of people had a lot of views on the topic. Can I come to you, Chisholm? What are your thoughts on that subject?
Thank you for that question, Hyacinth. I should say here that I have discussed, or maybe just vented to my whole team, as much as they cared to listen, about why this is not a conversation we should be having in 2021, and, you know, had a conversation with Astrid about this, and had a conversation with Hyacinth about this, and have actually been pulled in and nominated to share my opinions, that by the end of the day I was just like, oh. So let's do that here again. I think this topic is controversial. So just for the background is, as women, should we identify ourselves as just founders, or should we identify ourselves as female founders? And there are people who are arguing for just founders because men don't say I'm a male founder. And there are people who are saying, well, that's great, but I'm happy to be a female founder because of representation. So just to touch on that a bit, I think the topic is controversial because of intersectionality. I think on one hand, women rightfully argue that they, because men are not called men founders or male founders, they shouldn't be called women founders either. And they have a point. On the other hand, other women feel like their experience of equality or the lack thereof does not exist under the assumed all-encompassing umbrella of being a woman. As long as women are not equally represented in the boardrooms, in leadership positions, there needs to be a highlight of their work, their efforts, where they currently are as a woman or female founder. And they also have a point. And I also want to say here that this conversation, obviously, at least in my mind, does not include the full gender spectrum. We're just looking at male versus female yet again, right? But this is only the first layer. I think that when having this conversation, it is compounded by intersectionality because this is where experiences merge based on various intersecting identities, so much so that it becomes hard to consider oneself in a vacuum or to decipher one identity from the other. So this means that if we take me, for example, I am not only a woman, I am a Black, African, Nigerian woman. I am also a mother, a Black mother, an entrepreneur, this and that, right? So one does not come before the other. I cannot say, no, I am more a Black woman than I am a Nigerian woman, because my experiences of the world has intersected with my identity and is difficult to separate. So if you consider yourself as just one thing, in spite of your intersectionality, that's okay too. And I think that's amazing. It's a privilege. But it's not really about who, so just trying to break down a little bit what intersectionality is. It's not really about who has more challenges compiled by the identities they have that intersect. It's really about context and lived experience. So Astrid spoke just a little bit ago about lived experiences. And honestly, I think it takes, to be fair, I think it takes a significant amount of privilege or ignorance to see ourselves only as one identity, so much so that we fail to see the constraints that other people face. So where do I stand on this conversation on female founder versus being called founder? I cannot in good conscience consider myself, in isolation. I know enough about constructs. I read, and I have a fair share of my experience with intersecting identities and how it is received in society. So I am both a founder and a female founder. I am also a Black founder and recently a mompreneur. I wear all those badges proudly because I understand that representation matters. So just to summarize, I think that when we define constructs or enter conversations like this, we have to do it with consideration. We have to be careful to consider all sides. We can not only think about equality, but we must also consider equity, intersectionality, and much more. So here goes my rant.
Thank you, and what a phenomenal mompreneur you are. Anybody that hasn't seen Chisholm in the workplace, she's a mother of a 1.5-year-old. She's running 3 companies, and her baby is a boss baby, literally a boss baby. That little girl, she's going to be running business when she's 5 because she's in the office. Well, before this very strict lockdown, she was in the office every day, and she's doing business as well. So you're doing a great job, Chisholm, as a mompreneur. So Jacob, I'd just like to come back to you. You did touch quite briefly on some of the challenges that non-binary people face. Would you like to elaborate a little bit more on the challenges in the workplace that non-binary people face, and how we can advocate allyship, for example?
No, I will. Yeah. Breaking tension. No, absolutely. I will, absolutely. You're welcome, Tiffany. So look, it is contextual, and I think building on some of the key points that Chisholm just brought up in that last, I wouldn't call it a rant, Chisholm, but I would call it a very insightful and important perspective, aka a rant. So, and I love a rant. I'm very here for it. It's my favorite fruit. But look, I think it is contextual, and it's going to be down to each individual. But broadly speaking, because I can only speak in the broadest of senses, I'm a broad person with broad experiences. It's what it is. So there's anything from, I mean, the blunt way I can say this is pick a problem, and I guarantee you we're going to deal with it in a different way. And probably worse off if you're just comparing us to cis people. Also, because we've just thrown the word cisgender around quite a bit, just for context, in case anyone doesn't know what cisgender or cis means, it just means it's from ancient Greek, I'm fairly sure, and it's actually meaning on the same side as. So it means that the gender you were assigned at birth, when you popped out, and the doctor was just like, oh, is it a boy or a girl? Well, let's look at the genitals. That basically means what it is. It's just like, it makes sense, it fits, it's on the same side as your sex parts. It's like nearly midnight. I've clearly lost words, but just for context, because I love people learning. Look, when it comes to issues facing non-binary people and gender diverse people in the workplace, I mean, I'm just going to give you a basic example. So for in Australia, you can, and a few different parts of the world now, which is great, you can self-identify with an X gender marker. So you have M for male, F for female, and then you have X for, I think our terminology, it's very outdated, but indeterminate or unknown, which is, that ain't a thing. I'm very determined about what my gender is, but super cute federal government, shuckers to you. For me to go through that process a few years ago here in Victoria, our laws were so outdated that I had to medically transition to be allowed to, in my workplace, change a HR form. And in that context, this is how drastic it is, and this is not uncommon, this is very common around the world, just to, by Martin, but just to be able to change your forms and just change like one little thing on your little employee certificate, if you will. In Victoria, I would have had to have gone to a psychiatrist. I would have had to have a social worker and an endocrinologist, all of which would have to have come out of my own pocket because it's not subsidized by any of our healthcare systems here. I would have had to have started medically transitioning. So I would have had to go on steroids or hormone blockers. I would have had to have been sterilized. So I would have had to had a pick a thing basically, but it's anything from having uteruses removed to having gonads removed to having so many violations of one's body, to then get that medical certificate, take it to HR and say, I would like to change my gender. I refused basically, and I kicked up a massive stink, and it took about 6 months. And I had to like crack out law to basically, and I'm not a legal expert, I just pretend that I am, not in court, that's very illegal, but just to get my own way, I was just so like, look, legally, there is nothing that actually requires me to have to do this in order to change one little thing on my form. So no, I won't be doing that. And eventually they came around, and now it's just like standard clause and standard policy, like a name change or anything like that. And we've made it much easier. But we are, in my current workplace, an exception to that rule in that case. The other issues, and that's like down here, that's like the lowest of low bars. The other issues are anything from underemployment, workplace harassment, discrimination. Trans and gender diverse people are some of the most underemployed people around the world, let alone in Australia, which is a high income country. We have some of the least protections when it comes to workplace and industrial law reform and support. We are very unlikely to be promoted into particular areas. I will say personally, I've been in several roles where I've been exemplary in what I do. You heard my bio at the start. I'm pretty good at what I do. And I've been told I don't have the experience or that my personality isn't leadership material. Which is super cute because I'm just like, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Did you get an award from the Queen? I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that we're equal. I'm so sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry. So to that. So it's just crap, basically, at the end of the day. And this is the thing, is that we know what the bigotry looks like. We see it. We see what you're doing. And I think people forget that for, I'm sort of trying to answer a couple of questions all together, so apologize, Hyacinth, just to make your job more difficult, but you're welcome, is minoritized people, and I say minoritized because we're not minorities, we are minoritized. We are crushed down in power structures. We know the words that get used about us. We know the code that gets said about us as though we don't understand what you're doing. We know that coded terminology, what prevents us from getting to where we should be. If you're good at what you do, this is a whole merit discussion. If you're good at what you do, you should get the damn job at the end of the day. That should just be it.
Yeah.
Because the only thing when it comes to gender that is holding us back is femphobia, is misogyny, and transphobia. Those are the things that hold us back. Because show me a cis straight white man who has been held back because of his gender. Would love to see it. Would love to see that as a trend, not as an isolated case for a change. That would be lovely.
Wow, thank you, Jacob.
Welcome.
I saw a lot of people nodding their heads there in the comment section. People were reacting to what you were saying there, and Tiffany was saying thank you for highlighting some potentially easily addressable policy items. So thank you so much for that. Justina, watching on Facebook, thank you for your question. We will address your question later on. So just to let everybody know, we have around 30 more minutes left of this section with the panelists. I've got a lot more questions to get through. So I'm going to ask you to just speed up a tad with your answers. And I'm going to ask the participants, please send us your questions. Post your comments, send us your questions, because we will, in 30 minutes, we'll have a quick 2.5 minute break, then we'll go straight into the Q&A with yourselves, and we'd like to just start answering questions straight away so we can get through as many as possible. Okay, so Astrid, I'm going to come to you now. And the pandemic, there's been lots of discussions about how it's affected women. There's even talks of an impending she-session. Would you like to address that? Would you like to tell us more about that, please?
Yes. Sure. Thank you, Hyacinth. This is very topical, absolutely. And so more and more data is coming out to show that COVID-19 has compounded gender inequality, and the picture gets even more worrying when you look at the layers of intersectionality beneath that and see that women of colour are suffering far greatly than white women. That's applicable globally. The UN has published quite a lot of data in this area, and in fact their data shows that the pandemic-induced poverty surge is on course to widen the gender poverty gap, meaning that more women than men will be pushed into extreme poverty globally. And some of the reasons why are because women are overrepresented in many of the industries hardest hit by COVID. Think of the food, services industry, retail, beauty, hospitality, entertainment. Women also typically earn less and hold less secure jobs. So with plummeting economic activity following the pandemic, we know that women are especially vulnerable to losing their jobs and livelihoods. And within these aforementioned sectors, such as the services industry, travel and tourism, informal employment is common, which means that workers were already subject to low pay, poor working conditions, and lacking in social protections like pension and healthcare. So where this resonates the most, I would say, is the claim that the impact of the pandemic has set back women's equality by 25 years. And existing gender inequalities have had a disproportionate economic impact on women. And to be honest, Hyacinth, I think it's really important to mention frontline workers who don't get the security and protection of working from home like you and I do. So women are thought to make up over 85% of nurses globally and 75% of primary caregivers. And an October 2020 report from the International Council of Nurses released figures to show that 1,500 nurses had died from COVID-19 in 44 countries. And they estimate that healthcare workers could make up more than 10% of total global cases. So this tells us that care workers carry this additional occupational hazard that the majority of us do not face. And there's still a lack of information to break down these deaths in ethnicity, but it is certainly alleged that women from Black and ethnic minority groups in the nursing profession have absolutely suffered. So I hope that answers the question on the She session and some of the considerations around it, Hyacinth.
Yes, it did. Thank you. Gosh, it just makes me think that entrepreneurship is the way forward. Just for some security. Which leads me to you, Chisholm. I just want to ask you, because it makes you think of the emotional impact of that. So, Chisholm, what's emotional tax? And how does it affect the workplace?
Thanks, Hyacinth. So for a maybe not so simple definition, because I will probably try to explain it to pieces, but emotional tax is the heightened experience of being treated differently from your peers due to gender, race, ethnicity, and this often has negative effects on mental health. It worsens the feelings of isolation and it makes it difficult to thrive at work. Since we're addressing gender today, I would try to focus my response on only gender, but be aware that it affects other parameters, especially on the premise of race or ethnicity, Black people especially. And also when you're Asian, Black, or Latinx woman or a non-binary person, the emotional tax at work and society can get even higher. So I think according to research conducted by Catalyst is a renowned global nonprofit organization that has expertise in DEI. The reality is that many women, non-binary people, especially those with additional identity from the majority, so inserts Asian, Black, Indigenous, multiracial, all of that good stuff, they feel that they have to be on guard all the time at work to protect against bias. The harmful experiences they have can, occur both inside and outside the workplace. And this often prevents employees from being able to truly thrive at work. Some of these situations that can be harmful include, for example, being asked to do office housework or being constantly interrupted in a meeting, being the only one in the room, being talked over, being made to feel crazy or like you're overreacting when you raise concerns. It starts with the little things and then it gets compounded to dealing with harassment, having your hair touched without consent or being told that you are exceptionally articulate or not like the other people in your race. This type of backhanded compliments can be very detrimental, and I also like to mention here that oftentimes when we talk about emotional attacks or things that, non-binary people or women, have to deal with in the workplace, oftentimes, the solution that we get or the advice that we get is you need to be more assertive, you need to lean in. And this notion doesn't always consider cultural differences. And moreover, some groups of people might not get away with being more assertive. I mean, when I'm more assertive, I'm an angry Black woman, so we have to be realistic with how things affect different people of different cultures. So basically, when employees of any backgrounds don't feel that their perspective are welcomed or included, the fact of the matter is, since we all understand money, your company's bottom line, your revenue, your profits also suffers because they cannot bring their full selves to work. So how do we avoid emotional tax? We can do this by incorporating more inclusive processes. So an inclusive workplace is one that understands, welcomes, values the differences between people, and these differences can include gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability, ability, and various identities. So inclusion must be part and parcel of every environment that supports diversity, to ensure the culture of collaboration and respect, which in turn increases the contribution of all employees. And to finish off here, I think that while it is easier to see diversity because it is quantifiable and it can be articulated in metrics, it is more challenging to measure inclusivity. So companies, employees, and leaders should keep in mind that diversity and inclusion must take place in tandem. They cannot be isolated. You cannot do diversity without ensuring inclusivity. Both are intertwined, they are conjoined. So this needs to be done across all business structures through a rework of internal processes, company culture revamp, and of course, educational initiatives that stimulate change.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I was just thinking, I love the passion that's coming through from all the panelists. When you're talking, you can see that you're so passionate about the topic, D&I, the subject of it. So thank you so much for your input, guys. This is gold. So, Jacob, really loving the experience that you're bringing to the table today, having such a vast wealth of experience in this field. So thank you so much. Can we ask you, can you just name some simple measures that companies can implement to improve their inclusivity for all people?
Employ us in leadership positions. That's it. Like literally it. Like if you want to change it, just put us in at the top. It's fine. We'll probably be able to fix some of it. That'd be great. Right. But I think too, it's just like, I don't know, like, I think I'm not against the question, but I'm trying to make this very, very clear is that if you want to, if you as a business or a person in a leadership position want to call yourself an ally, being an ally is a very active job. Okay, it's a very active job. You do not get to rock up to, I don't know, my pride parades. They're mine. No one else is there. So Jacob's pride parades, bam, coming at you. But it's like you can't just rock up to a pride parade with your business like logo, slap a rainbow around it, and just be like, oh, we are so inclusive for this week of the year. So inclusive. Oh, so inclusive. It's just like, cool, show me your metrics. Show me your numbers. Walk that talk, baby G. I would love to see it. Like, don't hide. Don't hide from it. I would rather, I'll be honest, I would rather any company just be so like, you know what, we're actually really shit at this and we need to do better, rather than just be like, it's fine. We're so inclusive. It's just like, it's okay if you're not, work on it. Like, put into your strategic documents. Like, if you only work with metrics and quantitative data, and I say this as a qualitative researcher, I haven't mentioned I'm a researcher, it's just so like, if you're going to reduce this down to numbers, work on a goal. That'd be great. If there are not enough people in, I know Astrid, for example, you're in STEM. If there are not enough people of a particular demographic who you think are like available for that job because they're not in the field, they're there, you're just not looking for them or seeing them, put out a scholarship, fund us, get us educated, put in the effort. That is what I want to see. Do not just write a policy, do not write a mission statement, do the work. Just do the work, because if you're not going to do the work, I don't care, and I'm not going to work with you. And I'm a consultant. I turn people away when they're just like, we really just want to do it from the ground up. I'm just like, you can do it.
Yeah.
That's my answer. Just do it.
Yeah, thank you. I like that you talked about metrics, and quite often the metrics are boiled down to the simplest form of metrics: cis male, cis female. Oh, we're very diverse. And diversity is about so much more than that.
Yeah, but I think, sorry, just to build on that, but it's also just like, I know we're talking about gender here, but again, we can't extrapolate gender from any other experience. It's just so like, yeah, it's already a problem that we're doing like male and female and yada yada yada, which is very important for women's participation in the workforce. I want to make that really clear. My participation in the workforce is not an affront or an awe to women's participation. It's literally all of our groups together being able to get into this. But I also don't want to reduce men's experiences down to the gender marker either, because I want data on single dads. I want data on incarcerated men getting back into the workforce. I want men of color in these conversations. I want men with disabilities in these conversations. I want immigrants in these conversations. This is what I want, because we can't just be convenient anymore. I'm done with convenience, because none of us are. No one on this call is. So either put in the effort and actually do it, or bugger off and close your business, because I'm done. That's it.
Absolutely, and I guess we're all here. Yep, we're all cheering what you just said, Jacob, and we're all here for that reason, because we want to make change, and we want to learn how to make change and how to improve and how to be better. So thank you. You just mentioned, Astrid, you're in STEM. So how does gender inequality manifest itself in the tech industry, and what can leaders do to improve inclusivity?
Yeah, it's a good question, Hyacinth, and also thank you, Jacob, for your answer and for also mentioning STEM. It's a big topic. I'll try to unpick it. So women and underrepresented groups are an essential contribution to the technology sector. And without them, we will not have products, new technology, or inventions that have been designed with, the other half of the population in mind. So why then has the industry been so tarnished by discrimination, sexism, and unsafe working conditions, with an alarming number of women leaving the industry? Discrimination within tech is in the news almost daily, and it isn't a problem that looks set to go away anytime soon. So some research from Women Who Tech, which anonymously surveyed 1,000 tech employees, consisting of founders and investors globally, on their experiences within the tech sector, found out that this problem is still rife, and there is still systemic sexism and racism that respondents experience. And what Women Who Tech found in their 2020 survey was that things hadn't improved since the previous survey they did in 2017. Now, nearly 50% of women had experienced sexual harassment, 60% had experienced unwanted sexual physical contact, 56% had received sexual slurs made against them, 32% had been physically groped, and 24% had been sent graphic photos. So creating a safe and welcoming environment for women in technology has quite a lot of work to be done based on survey results like that. And, the tech sector needs some serious changes. Women Who Tech also released findings from this 2020 global report to show that 47% of women of colour founders had experienced workplace harassment, and 65% of the LGBTQ+ community had also experienced harassment. And there's another big shift, and that is that more recently, 2020 figures have shown a substantial drop in venture capital funding for women-led startups. So in 2019, I think it was 2.8%, and in 2020 it fell from 2.8 to 2.3%. There's some speculation that the pandemic has made investors, more wary of risks and more likely to stick to their existing networks, which are often, boys' clubs. And it's far tougher for women or non-Don Drapers to break into these clubs. So bro-tech culture, it is problematic. Gender, sexual orientation, and ethnicity all come into play in a sector that's dominated by cisgender white men, where these same men appear to fund people who look like them. And Women Who Tech and many others have done some really important work to highlight the problem. So the answer really has to be that more men, especially those men who overridingly hold the positions of power, need to understand and read more about systemic inequality and be allies and listen more and attend these sessions and sort of come on board. That's my answer for this question, Hyacinth.
Yeah, okay, lovely. Thank you so much. Lots of stats there. Again, we will share this information with you after the event. So if you were furiously writing and didn't catch everything there, don't worry, we're going to share this info with you. Thank you to Lisa, who is joining us on Facebook, for your comment. You said what you found in the cultural scene is that lack of inclusion is so established that people aren't easily aware of it. Active inclusion politics is to question the whole field and all the processes that curate, distribute, and fund art. Yes, absolutely. Chisholm, I'd like to come back to you. You have mentioned intersectionality quite a few times. For those of us who are not aware of what that term means, in context with D&I, could you please expound upon that and tell us how it manifests in, diversity and inclusion in the workplace?
Okay, I hope I can do Crenshaw some justice here.
Oh, just before you do, I'm really going to speed up the answers now because we have 10 minutes left of this section before we go into the Q&A. So get your questions out, people. We have 10 minutes left of this section, so speed answers.
Okay, so I'm going to try to talk really fast because it's difficult to give a speed answer for intersectionality. But intersectionality deals with essentially the deeply interconnected nature of social categorizations on a basis of things like race, gender, social class, ethnicity, religion, physical appearance, height, caste, disability. And they apply to a given individual or group of people. So intersectionality often creates overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. Now, the framework for intersectionality looks at how our many identities combine or compound to create different layers of discrimination or privilege. So how is intersectionality relevant to diversity and inclusion in the workplace? Well, it has everything to do with it. It has to do with people's lived experiences and identities and how we can include them to ensure that we're championing inclusion. So which brings me to the thinking about the reality of how this might be handled badly. Sometimes when the topic of intersectionality comes up, we might think, get over it. You're victimizing yourself. We're all people. Don't see a difference. I don't see color. Stop putting a label on yourself. Don't point out your intersectionality because you're creating division and highlighting your difference. These are many reasons I've heard. So I'm just restating them. Don't do this because it can be very damaging. The world where everyone is equal and people don't judge or have biases is an utopia, one in which we were fighting for and one in which we continue to aspire to, but we're not there yet. So intersectionality matters. It has everything to do with lived experience, context, and representation. And of course, it matters for DEIB. So that's my fast answer.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much, Chisholm. Jacob, I'm going to come back to you. So earlier, Chisholm said that she believes identity is a social construct. I'm going to ask you, do you believe identity is a social construct? And if so, how does it play out in the diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging manifesto?
Okay. I've been thinking about this quite a bit, and I will try and speed answer this one as much as I can. Look, I think identity is yours as an individual. So you have your individual identity, you have a community identity, you have a bound identity, which might be like friends, family, however those are defined. You might have cultural identities, social identities. You have different relations of identity with different people, right? So all of those identities are yours. So they should be chosen by you and for you. And I appreciate that that's also a very individualistic cultural perception and answer to this one as well. I am going to try and be somewhat interculturally competent on this one as well. But look, I think that the way I look at it, so I also have a background in mental health and psychology. And so I would look at this and sort of say, yeah, on all technicalities, you know, everyone has bias, everyone discriminates. It's just sometimes they're quite harmful. Like who should drink from what water tap? Bad discrimination. If you want to wear the red sweater versus the orange sweater, not a bad discrimination. You're just choosing which sweater you want to wear on a given day because it's cold, right? But the thing is that all of those perceptions and all of our identities are fed to us or encouraged or enforced in one way, shape, or another. So it's a bit of a nature-nurture argument. I don't think that's a great duality. I think it's a bit of a false duality. But to make it clear is that it's messy. Is the answer. Is that yes, it kind of is, no, it's kind of not. So it kind of just depends, if you will. If you want to read some good stuff on it, I would strongly recommend reading some Judith Butler. If you can sit through it and try and understand Judith Butler, I'm still trying to work that out, or reading a great book, which is non-academic, called Transgender 101. Which is by Bibian Hon, which is a phenomenal Southeast Asian perspective on gender identity and gender construction, which I find is really, really beautiful and I give to my students all the time. How does it manifest in diversity and inclusion? I mean, I mentioned bias before. If you're influenced by relations that you have that have impacted your grounding of your identity, that's the bias that you will take with you. Again, we all have them. I have them. We all have them. So it's just important to, if you are a D&I practitioner, for example, check your bias. Mm-hmm. If you're a person in the workplace, check your bias. We're seeing that with a lot of the responses to Asian hate at the moment. Mm-hmm. And some of the really brilliant pieces, but we've also seen it by brilliant activists in Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter movement, is understand if you have a racial prejudice and that's the first thing that goes to come out of your mouth, stop, check where that comes from, understand why that's there, and then change it. That's what you need to do, because all of that is a construction as well. And if it is a construction, it means that you can also unlearn it and relearn something else.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much. So just quickly, Astrid, Jacob, how can we ensure safety for people from minority communities? And I'm going to read this to make sure that I get it correct. LGBTQIA+ communities in the workplace.
Do you want to go?
Yeah, Jacob, is that okay? I mean, look, there is no there's no one size fits all approach here. There's obvious things like ensuring your leadership group set the standard, and that your policies echo tolerance and acceptance, and that they embrace difference. Having a code of conduct that works for you. I think something else interesting to mention here is something that's called bystander intervention training, which I know has become really popular in the States. And so bystander intervention training is thought to be a really great way to deal with racism or harassment in the workplace. And it's identified that anti-harassment training, which is huge in the States. Actually, it's been adopted as a matter of law in several states. It isn't working, and instead having this focus on bystander intervention training, something being trialled on college campuses and in the military, enables people or encourages people to say something if they see something that is wrong. And this can apply in the workplace, because properly trained bystanders feel more empowered to call it out, or whether it be a sexual joke or objectification or an exploitative situation or sexual harassment. So the way it works is bystanders will receive training that can help them feel more equipped and more able to call out the misogyny or whatever it is. And the early indications sort of are that taking this approach can be surprisingly effective. There was a study group of students and soldiers who've been taking part in bystander training, who claimed to feel, I suppose you could say, a renewed sense of allyship, knowing what they could do if they saw a problem. So that's sort of my halfpenny's worth there. Jacob, I'm sure you've got some things to add to the question too.
Oh, sorry, Hyacinth.
Sorry, I'll mute myself. I'm unfortunately going to move you along because we are, we've got 1 minute left of this section, but
Can I say one ever so quick thing, which is just role models? That's all I want.
Okay, role models, perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. I didn't want to close this section out without doing what I like to do every single time, which is to ask our panelists to just give the audience 3 top tips that you can take away to ensure a more inclusive D&I working environment for all people. So 3 top tips for making it a more equitable world. Chisholm, we'll start with you.
Okay. I guess my reflection here is that it is important to create a culture for open and honest conversation, and understand that when you say more open world, we mean gender equitable, right? So understand that gender equity in the workplace involves everyone. Mm-hmm. And if we're able to get there, then we can properly address barriers that people face, and the leaders and the board members must be committed to the process. So I guess my first tip would be to rethink systems. So oftentimes in the workplace, the burden of driving gender equity tends to fall on individuals, but this should not be the case. Leaders should acquire the education necessary. If you must pay for it, to understand what policies and practices may be perceived as, say, supportive of or dismissive of women and gender diverse people, and thereafter make a super firm shift towards inclusive leadership. My second tip would be to revamp hiring practice to reflect more diversity. It is a well-known fact that companies with better gender diversity metrics or ratios outperform those, who don't with the least. So to start, companies can evaluate their company culture. Is it an inclusive place to work in general? And then is it an inclusive place on the basis of gender? Many companies across industries, they fail to realize this because they're largely homogeneous. So we talked, Astrid spoke about the tech sector, which is male dominated. And then you look at support roles like nursing, which is filled by women, but in both cases, the customers or clients that they serve are actually more diverse than the people who are attending to said customers. So it really makes it difficult to understand their pain points, their needs, or their experiences. So imagine going to the healthcare sector, trying to explain your reality as an Asian woman to a woman who has no idea what you're talking about. So in the workplace, steps we could take to changes is, of course, to create an inclusive gender diverse workplace, to have a diverse interview panel. I think that's really important. Promote gender equality with better job descriptions, having fair compensation practices, and of course, learning from exit interviews. So Astrid mentioned earlier about, like when you're looking for work, contact people who have left and said, what is the culture here? I think companies can actually take responsibility in when people leave, say, hey, there's no fear of repercussions. Can you give us, your honest feedback? And the last thing I would add is to think beyond gender diversity. The ultimate goal is to create a culture where all voices are heard, all perspectives are considered without judgment. So focusing on inclusion ensures that your company gets the most out of diversity. So you need to incorporate equity, diversity, inclusion, belonging into your organizational value proposition. Identify diversity as a key component of organizational cultural change, clarify a global and even local diversity strategy, and appoint a C-level executive to be in charge of this. And one of the things I read recently, another way to think about this is perhaps even recalling how we say diversity and inclusion to inclusion and diversity. So we understand that we have to do the inclusion first. Otherwise, diversity doesn't actually matter. So there goes my top 3 tips.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Jacob, we're going to come to you.
All right, great. Top 3 tips are recognize that there's a crap load of work to do, and it's not going to be easy. But if you need help, then you're welcome to email me or add me on LinkedIn. So there we go. Pew, pew. Love that. Number one. Number two, I would say is don't assume that anything that you've learnt today makes you a great practitioner now. This is a spot in the middle of your journey, like it would be for anyone else. The university I work at is Monash Uni, and our Latin phrase is ancora imparo, which means I'm still learning, which I think is a great way to epitomize, practice. Everything is practice. Wellness is a practice. Diversity and inclusion, or inclusion and diversity, is a practice. It's all practice. So put in the practice. And thirdly, I just want, you're going to make mistakes. So just own it. Like I'm trying not to say the F word, so I do apologize. It's just like, you're gonna up, basically. And when you do that, just be accountable for doing the wrong thing. Okay. Focus on the guilt of your actions and rectify them. Do not internalize it and make it a shameful response, because nothing will get done. Everyone will feel bad about it, and it will just be a crappy outcome for everyone. So just focus on if you are going to focus on guilt, use guilt to be better and to do better things. That'd be great.
Thank you, Jacob. And to close out this section, Astrid, your 3 top tips, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Gism and Jacob, for giving me time to think on this one. Okay, number one, we can't tackle gender inequality if we're in any form of denial about its existence. Gender inequality is not about women and it's not about men. It's about making workplaces work for everyone. Mm-hmm. There's been this epidemic of trying to fix women to be less emotional, better at negotiating pay rises, more assertive, more feminine, but less bossy. And we've been told to lean in and step up and walk across hot coals and all the rest of it. So this idea that to succeed, we need to keep fixing ourselves to be more like the prototype man is ultimately wrong, and it's ultimately seeped in misogyny. So let's stop subscribing to this formula and start challenging the idea that it's workplaces that are broken and not us. Second take home would be the pandemic has shown us that the days of demand and command leadership styles might finally be over, as we've seen leadership styles of great women leaders, far too many to mention in this session here. So reflecting on one positive outcome from the pandemic is that women leaders are nailing it. They've shown their natural tendency to be effective leaders during a crisis, putting people first, more collaborative, empathetic, democratic, and better at relationship building. These same qualities that have been used by women leaders all over the globe, I believe, mean that the tide might be changing. And lastly, the last take home would be get comfortable with the uncomfortable and start by asking women or LGBTQs in your life about what experiences they might have encountered with discrimination. Ask them if they would be prepared to share their harassment stories, because trust me, people have them. And believe you me, I think people keep these wretched stories so bottled up and need to talk about them. So ask them. And when they talk, listen, listen like you've never listened before when they tell you.
Wow, thank you, everybody. That was fantastic. I would just like to leave you with one tip, and this is a really simple tip. If you want to attract different people, then look at your marketing. What does your company look like on your website, for example? What do your recruitment ads look like? What do they sound like? Who are you talking to? I can't tell the number of companies that I've historically looked at and straight away walked away from applying for a position purely because I thought, I don't want to work there because I'm not represented, and that's such a simple fix. And it's not, we're not encouraging you to just make this fix to look the part, but actively, who have you got in your organization that you can use to represent your organization? Start from within. That would just be a quick tip from me. So brilliant, thank you so much. We have come to the end of the first section, and I just wanted to ask we're going to have a quick 2-minute break, but just a little bit of a quick feedback. Anybody would like to unmute and just give a quick bit of feedback about the panel discussion so far? Go ahead, Lena.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Amazing, amazing session. It is mind-blowing. All of the panelists were really amazing. And I really could connect to this. I myself have worked on a project on diversity and inclusion. And when I onboarded this company, which lasted for about 9 months as a consultant, and the first question I asked was, why are we focusing on diversity? We should start with inclusion. And the whole of the HR team was amazed. And they asked me, why do you say so? Because I come from a different background and I moved to a country where I'm finding it really difficult to find a job. I think the first thing that should make me comfortable is to be included in this society, right? Accept the way I am, respect my opinions, my interests, my ideas, and a voice. I mean, getting an opportunity to speak at the table. That's what it matters, right? So I could completely relate to what Chiso said and what Astrid spoke about data, and being comfortable with the uncomfortable is something that I can completely relate to. It was a real tough journey after moving here, but then companies are really taking great initiatives, and it has been a great focus, at least from the last 3 years, about attracting people from different backgrounds. And of course, there are a lot of tips from this session as well, a lot of experiences that I could take away. Thank you so much. It was really amazing.
Great, thank you so much, Lena. Thank you. So we're going to jump into the questions. If you have any questions, please throw them at us. We've got 20 minutes left. And so I'm just going to go up through the chat and find the questions that I can. So is it Miss Undell? Had a question. Could you please advise on how to talk about the pay gap that affects minority in the workplace if money is not openly discussed? So could you please advise on how to talk about the pay gap that affects minorities in the workplace if money is not openly discussed?
Yeah, I can try and answer that, Hyacinth. If I understand the question correctly here, if it's a suspicion that you were being paid unequally, I mean, I think that there's two routes available to you. The one is to go through your sort of union, if you're a union member. The other one is to go to your leader or to go to HR. This is difficult, except for companies who publish transparent figures around salary. It's obviously very easy there to see whether you're on a level playing field. But I mean, I don't know. I don't want to ask you to share too much about your personal situation. So I could say that I could talk to you after the session. I think if you're in Norway, maybe I can help you a bit more on a sort of personal basis. So we don't have to lay it all out. Chiso, I don't know whether you've got anything to add to that too.
I think for me, I was just going to ask, is it possible to ask about what do other people, or what is the normal salary for people in this role? Like some of my teammates, you know, am I being paid commensurate to my skill, the experience, and the amount of work required? I think that should be a simple question that your HR personnel should be able to answer. And I think especially in countries like Norway. So I would encourage you to ask from that perspective of curiosity. And of course, if you do suspect that you're being paid less, then that is a problem. And that is something that needs to be addressed. So I would just start by asking, the innocent question of, am I being paid the same? Because I'm just curious.
Historically, though, companies have been guilty of doing that. We will not discuss money, we don't discuss salaries. And so when teammates have discussed salaries and, somebody's wanted to go to management to discuss their salary and broach the subject, it's been frowned upon and it hasn't been well received. So, this is a topic that does need to be addressed. Thank you so much for that question. So we have another question from Sophie Lang, and it says, do you have any advice for D&I in the early career sector? What do you see to be the biggest constraints in hiring in this sector? So do you have any advice for D&I in the early career sector? And what do you see to be the biggest constraints in hiring in this sector?
What is an early career sector, just to clarify? Is it like just when you're starting out as like in any industry, or is it specific? I just want to make sure that it's not a profession that I don't know.
So
from our perspective, it would be anything from student internship level right through to early graduate careers. So that first step between education and then careers.
I see. Okay. So the question is, what biggest constraints in this hiring sector? Actually, now it depends on the country we're looking at, but I think that generally, say in the US or in the UK, you might actually find more diversity represented in the early career than you see in, say, middle-level management or leadership or C-level management. So it really depends on the industry. But I think that this needs to be addressed the same way you address where you recruit your pool from in the first place. So I think there needs to be a strategy to diversify your hiring process. So if you're getting, so let's assume you're in Norway. If you're getting a group of students from the top 5 university that everyone loves, then you're missing out from other sectors or sections or type of schools. So what you need to do is open up to reach more people that previously are not in your current hiring pool. Use language that is attractive to, so if you're not hiring a diverse group, it's probably also something to do with your language that you might be blind to. So you might also try to reevaluate how you actually advertise, the words that you use, the pronouns that you use, and also what Hyacinth said, in terms of what does your website look like? If I go to your employee, and sometimes just to clarify, a lot of companies, they put on, the most diverse stock photos on their websites, but then you go on their LinkedIn and it's a bunch of, same type people. So, it's just, you have to look at what is actually being said by your ad or by your recruitment practice. And I think you need to start there. There are a lot of things you can do, but I think recruitment is where you start.
Yes, one thing I quite often advise some of my clients is, does your company reflect your values? And if it doesn't reflect your values, quite easy. If you can't see that visually, then there's a problem right there. So Nora Lee Fisher, she says, thank you so much. Even though I consider myself to be passionate about diversity and inclusion, I learned so much from your unique perspectives and experiences. Thank you for sharing them. So this question I'm going to direct to you, Jacob. What can you do when you are not part of the leadership team, but want to address problems concerning gender equality? How can you create change from the bottom up?
Burn it all. No, I think it's a hard thing to do. I mean, I get to be a real pain in the ass wherever I work because I'm tenured. I can do a lot of things, and it's very hard to get fired from a lot of places because companies don't want to put that paperwork in. They really can't, unless it's severe. But if they're just so I just don't like you, then it's just so kind of sucks, doesn't it? Because I'm really good at what I do. So to that. But look, I think if I've learned anything in my time, and this will be shocking to everyone, it's the shock of the day, the gag of the season. I used to be very shy. And then I turned 31 and stopped caring, which is just great. But look, it's a tough one, and it's really dependent on context. I think I think a lot of the burden gets put on us as minoritized groups to have to do that heavy lifting. I think we've said that several times in several ways today during this panel. But I would look, this is probably a cheeky way to do it, but because I do it often, is I go up to people and I'm just like, so you said you were going to be an ally to me. I've got an issue. Can you raise it? Because that'd be great. Appreciate it. Here's my issue. Because unfortunately, and no shade to anyone who is in HR, but it's just not useful half the time, unfortunately. Like, it's just not. It's just, you just go into a bureaucratic cycle and they're just like, we'll work that out for you. It's just like, you don't know the answer, and I know that you don't know the answer, but you're going to try and work out the answer, but not consult me on the answer. Cute. Hate that for me. Cancelled. But like, pull people up who you work closely with, or who believe you the first time you tell them something. I mean, like, the number of times where I have sneakily gone around someone else's back, which I'm sure is like a dog move, but also I don't really care, because people are getting harassed and discriminated against in the company, and I think that's worse than your little feelings getting hurt that I went behind your back. That I'm going to ask you to like do some of the heavy lifting. It's what I need. It's what it is. That's it. And yeah, but what I will say is that if you are in a position to, which is, I know is very difficult in the current state of the pandemic and will be for a number of years after. However, if you are in a position where you can safely leave that company or go do something else, go do it. Because honestly, some people don't want to change and they're not worth your fucking time. So just bail out of there. Because you know what? They don't deserve you. They don't deserve your expertise. So cancelled. What is?
Thank you, Jacob. So in other words, Astrid, HR, just quick now.
Yeah. Do you want me to have a quick go at answering the question? Sorry, Tyson.
No. I'm going to move on because we've only got 10 minutes left and we've got some other questions. But you know, that was just in reference to Jacob talking about HR.
I'm people and talents, Jacob, not HR.
I didn't say you weren't. It's fine. See, again, personalizing. We all do it. It's fine.
Right, moving swiftly along. Tiffany Lopez says, have we taken any initiatives to ensure that we are offering fair salaried roles or fair salaries for roles? Or how do we determine if we're offering fair salaries?
I think it's a feedback for one of the questions about pay gap.
Oh, right. Okay. Brilliant. Thank you. Follow along, Hyacinth. Follow along. So we have a question from Tamaka. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Says that, well, first of all, a comment. This is quite a good discussion on diversity. And then the question is, how often can we have such discussions?
If you're me, you have it every day. you have it as much as you can until something happens and something changes. But we have it on here through Diversify and Her Space monthly. But, you know, I have conversations with Hyacinth and, you know, with Astrid and with, you know, anyone who cares to listen, because it drives me crazy and I want it fixed. And I feel that the way to continue is we need to keep having the conversation. It's uncomfortable, it's not convenient, but always remember that if you have the option to say, oh no, this is too much stress, I don't want to deal with it today. There are people who don't ever have that as an option because it is their day in, day out reality. Mm-hmm. So as much as we need to, I think.
Absolutely, continual education.
Can I just add to that, Hyacinth? Sorry, if I may. It was just to say that anyone just sort of reflecting on that question, for anyone who is struggling to find out a way to bring it up with your leadership team, if you're in Norway at least, you could start up a discussion about the ARP rules. And this is a new sort of policy being brought in by the Likestilling og diskrimineringsombud for reporting on your equality figures. Any company over 50 has to now report on this. It was brought in since beginning of 2020. And although it only applies to workplaces of 50 plus, you can also incorporate this policy, if you want to call it that, if employees take a vote on it. So do some searching on ARP. I think it might be something Chiso could potentially be holding a session on in the future. But that is a really good way in Norway to take up and start a discussion with your leadership team.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Astrid. Silma, I did see your question, but as it pertains purely to Norway, I hope you don't mind. I'm just going to skip over it to ask a more general question from Lena that says, only purely because we've got 6 minutes left. Lena's asking about structured interviews. How far do structured interviews help diverse talents? Has anyone tried structured interviews?
Hi, Saint. I just want to touch a bit on Silma's question because I think it's relevant whether you're in Norway or not, the answer to that. I mean, I think...
Would you like to read the question out, Chisholm, and then answer it?
It is, from your perspective and experience, personal or professional, what are the most important and urgent challenges around inclusion, diversity, and belonging in Norway, insert Australia, insert anywhere else? Honestly, denial. I think that is the single biggest challenge, is that if you had to actually solve any problem, you have to admit that it exists. And I think the challenges that we have in doing this work is you still have to argue with people and rationalize with people and try to listen to people and try not to choke them. You know, when you're trying to explain that, hey, this is an issue, this is why it's important, and this is why it needs to be solved. I think there are a lot of challenges, but I think in Norway, from my perspective, one is the gendering of diversity of DEIB. It's just like, it's only about gender. So let's just worry about how many women on boards and how women, and then you're there saying, but it's not just about women, it's about all these other things that we're not considering. So I think it's just the denial of, or the lack of, like it's the denial of the experience. I'd love to hear what, Astrid and Jacob have to say about this.
Yeah, I mean, I can say, just quickly chip in, sorry, Jacob, if that's okay, is that I think that passive bystander effect, I would say, is something that that springs to mind. It's those discriminatory remarks, moments where we've all been passive bystanders and thought it's just so much more comfortable to pretend that didn't happen. And, it's this idea of getting comfortable with the uncomfortable when you see or hear things that it could be, remarks that are sexist, racist, ableist, homophobic, or whatever. It's about putting your hand up and saying, why do you think that? Or why do you think that's funny? It's about starting with those small moments and small nuances. I think that's certainly something that I would add to Chisholm's answer. Jacob, I'll go over to you, my darling.
Yeah, cheers, mate. Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, thanks. That's about as masculine as I get. Yeah, look, I think denial is definitely part of it. I think systemic issues are definitely part of it. I think passivity is definitely part of it. I think arrogance is a very large part of it, of just like, we don't need to do that, or like, we've already just like achieved blah. Okay, like, here's the thing. If you have received like an award, as someone who's received a lot of awards, but it's just like, if you've received an award for like, I don't know, being the best like country, business, blah, whatever, in, I don't know, like inclusion or like gender equality or whatever the fuck, it's just so like, look at how crap everyone else is. Like, it's not hard to like be looking fantastic amongst a pile of crap. It's just like, just because you're the best out of the pile doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing more out of this. Okay, like, if you are purely put into the point of, you want to be financially the best, or you want to have like the greatest return, or I don't know, just like receive a medal, I don't know, but it's just like, then go for the top. Like, don't just go for the top out of everyone else. Like, go for the top of the top. Set the standard, set the example, put the effort in. That's what I want to say. It's nearly 1 a.m. I'm very tired, but but it is. It's just like, it's kind of what it says on the tin. Just put the effort in. Do the work. Stop getting in your damn way and just do the damn work. I don't want to see another paper that is just sort of like, oh, the psychology of workplaces. It's just like, they're shit. That's the problem. Make them better. Just do it. Do the work.
Thank you so much, Jacob. We really appreciate you being here with us, especially because it's so late, 1 a.m. in the morning. Thank you for your commitment to the cause. And we're just going to end with the last question, which I read before from, oh, it's just gone, from Lena about structured interviews. Maybe Astrid, you might be able to answer this one.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question. I can't see it actually.
Lena, would you like to ask the question?
I think structured interviews are where, you kind of have, at least in my mind, a template that works for everyone. So that way you do not allow, unconscious biases to seep in, based on how someone looks, what school they went to, or what you perceive them to be. So that is one of the strategies that have been put in place to ensure that to fight discrimination. So just one.
Yeah, I don't have any experience with that, Lena. I've had experience with blind recruitment processes, but not in using, structured interview questions, to be honest. But I mean, if you have something to share, is it something you've used, Lena?
I have. Oh, sorry, go on.
Yeah, so during my experience with one of the banks in the Nordics that I worked as a consultant, we kind of looked into the whole HR processes and tried building strategies around how to make these processes more inclusive for the people within the organization. And as a part of the attract process, we tried defining structured interview model, and it happened to be a STAR method inside the structured interview model. So I'm so curious to know if someone has implemented this, what kind of results it had.
Yes, actually, Nora Lee Fisher says, definitely structured interviews is one of the methods that helps against discrimination. She said it's worked quite well in recruitment before.
I used it as well, actually. When I was living in New York, I had to replace myself. And it was one of the many ways we tried. So there are different ways things you can use sometimes together just to make sure that, all your bases are covered.
Brilliant, thank you. And Nora Lee Fisher said, Natasha says, I'm a huge advocate for behavioral interviews. And Natasha works in HR, as she mentioned it before. And so Nora says, structured behavioral interviews for the win. Right, so we've come to the end of today's session.
I'm so sorry. I just want to add a really quick comment just on behavioural interviews.
Jacob, for you, of course, please. The floor is
How dare you? The outrage, the allyship. It's palpable. No, I just want to make a really, really quick point just on some behavioural interview patterns that are used, is that they are really damaging to people who are neurodiverse, neurodivergent. So be very careful as you are using behavioural patterns, because they are steeped with a lot of neurodivergent bias. So just be very, very conscious of those as you use them. If you are going to use one that is developed by neurodivergent people, so people who are autistic or might have Asperger's, for example, so it actually accommodates them. And I will just say across the board, if you're looking for a recruitment process, trust me, there is going to be a company or a not-for-profit or a community group in your country who has already worked this out for you. You just need to go to them, you need to pay them for the work, and they will just fix all those problems for you. So trust, especially in the queer space and the disability space, we've already worked it out for you. So please just go and pay us to do it, and then you'll fix it in 5 minutes. You're welcome. And you're welcome, Natasha. I'm here to just clock bias. Pew, pew. So it is. Hyacinth, back to you in the studio.
Thank you so much, Jacob. That was brilliant feedback. Thank you. And, we fully agree with you. Pay for consultancy, get the people who are experts to come in and help you to develop your policies, your processes, and your structures. There's Chisholm, there's Astrid, there's Jacob. We have a team of consultants that work together, and we can help you. We can, work with you to create what you need to create in your company. Just want to remind everybody that the next event will be, let me just get the details here. Nikki's going to put it in the group for us, but it's the 21st of April, and we will be looking at cross-cultural communication. 21st of April, cross-cultural communication. And we will also be talking about, in another event, mental health and how that also affects diversity and inclusion in the workplace. So we've got lots more events lined up for you. We thank you so much that you have been a part of this conversation, and there's many of you who have been a part of all of the conversations, and you've really championed us with these talks. Thank you. You know, if you've got any suggestions of any other topics that you'd like us to cover, please do so. Please, you know, contact us. Nikki, would you like to just give us the best email address for them to contact us at?
For sure, you can contact me. My email is nikki@diversify.no. I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
That's for any suggestions. As mentioned earlier, the group will get back to you with a follow-up to this event today. There will be an email with lots of information, all of the resources that have been mentioned. We will send you, you know, a list of all of those resources to equip you. So we're not just going to leave you hanging high and dry, but, you know, stay in contact. We'll see you in a month, but in the interim, stay in contact. Jacob, thank you so much. You were phenomenal tonight for you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for being so engaged and so awake at, you know, over 1 in the morning. Astrid, thank you so much for your contributions. You are also excellent. And Chisholm, who lives, eats, breathes, and sleeps diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Thank you for setting up this initiative. A lot of people are getting a lot of food out of this. And to all of you wonderful participants, thank you so much for joining us today. And hopefully we'll see you next time.